We often hear that politicians are just a bunch of liars. You can't trust a word out of their mouth. But is that really true? Do they all just do nothing but lie?
Lies in politics? Welcome to Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you want to support our channel and our mission of encouraging discussion and not division, please join us on Patreon. The link is in the description. So Elgin, it seems like you can't go very long without hearing somebody in politics accusing the other of lying. They're lying, you're lying, this statistics is lying, that statistics is lying. It's very confusing. Is everybody really big, huge, fat liars? Can't we trust anybody? What's really going on here with all of these accusations on lies?
Well, it really comes down to what is a lie. And in its fundamental form, a lie is anything said with the intent to deceive. And this is a very powerful definition, but it's also one that's not always easy to apply. So, for example, if a politician tells you a statistic that they believe is true, they're not lying. They're just giving you false information. And this is the big distinction, is because there's what is true and then there's what is false. But then there's what you think is true and there's what you know to be false. And in there is the concept of a lie. If you are trying to deceive somebody, you're lying, whether what you said is factually true or not. And if you're not attempting to deceive somebody, then you're not lying. You're perhaps making a mistake. You could be dead wrong, but being wrong isn't the same as a lie. And you see this a lot in politics.
Yeah, Elgin, stealing from one of your examples in Preserving Democracy, you talk about a study about tax rates, and you talk about how the left was saying one thing about tax rates in the study, and the right said something else about that study.
It said the exact opposite.
Yeah, you want to share that example?
Well, yeah, there's a study on whether the tax rates increase the burden on the middle class. And they had a CBO study, and the Democrats came out and said, yes, this CBO study increased the tax rate. This was the Bush tax cuts in the early part of the century. And the Republicans came out and they said, no, the study showed that it increased the burden on the rich. Well, who's right? I used to do this in class when I was teaching, and no one could make sense of who was telling the truth or who wasn't, at which point I would bring out the CBO study and have them break off into groups and figure it out. And they would always come back and they say, well, actually both were correct. It depends on how you define tax burden, and it depends on which charts in the study you look at, and depending on how you define things, both sides were correct. And that's what you actually see a lot of in politics. I've seen congressmen who will talk about congressmen on the other side and say, well, if this particular congressman tells you something, you can take it to the bank. He may be wrong, but he believes it, and you can trust what he says.
He's acting with integrity.
On the other hand, if this other congressman says something, you can't believe a word they say. They lie and they make stuff up.
So when it comes down to that, and you see this, there's countless studies where, they create this graph, but it's kind of skewed one way or another. It's the same exact numbers and graphs, but they kind of skew it depending on who they're talking to. Mm-hmm. You see that if it supports your view, people are much more willing to believe the study. But if it doesn't support your view, they're more willing to explain it away or discount it or whatever.
The only difference is now that data is presented in a political context. And the biggest difference in performance is among the most numerate people. They're scoring a lot worse than they should have.
The low numeracy people are about 25 percentage points less likely to get the right answer if that answer is threatening to their ideology than if it's consistent with their ideology. The people who are high in numeracy, on the other hand, 45 percentage points less likely to get the right answer.
Rather than using their mathematical ability to come to the correct conclusion, they somehow selectively apply it to justify the conclusion they already believed beforehand.
People believe what they want to believe.
We had the study we just talked about in another video on political violence, where it showed the right was responsible for political violence from 1994 to 2024, but then from 20 2025, the right violence dropped, the left violence increased. And so in this year, 2025, the left is responsible for 80% of the violence. Now, a rational person would look at that and say, yeah, this is what it was, but it's changed. But you see the left reporting the previous period and the right reporting on the current period as if the other two periods didn't exist.
So when we're talking about lying and not lying when it comes to politics, are politicians, and I know broad general statements, take them with a grain of salt. Not everybody fits into the broad general statements, but we want to talk at the broad general statement level. When politicians are saying, see, look, we're doing the right thing. Look at how wonderful we are. Or look, they're messing us up. Look at how horrible things are. Are they really doing it with the intent of deceiving? Is that I want to be right a way of deceiving, or is it just something they believe and they're advocating with the tools that they have?
Well, an important fact to remember is everyone lies at some point, and the person people lie to the most is themselves. So if you're lying to yourself and you're ignoring, your confirmation bias, and you're looking at the economy and you're only seeing the parts that support your position, are you lying when you then say that to somebody else as well? Confirmation bias is very powerful. The other thing is when you have issues like the national economy. Well, the national economy is so large, so vast, that at any given time, there's going to be a lot of positive indicators and there will be a lot of negative indicators. Nothing is positive overall. I mean, for example, if oil prices drop, that's great for the majority of people who see their gas price and their energy costs go down. But if you're in the oil industry, that's really bad. And so there have been times where people really like the low prices and the oil industry is really suffering. So, what's good for one is bad for the other. Low prices are good for consumers, not necessarily as good for producers. High prices are good for producers to an extent, but not necessarily good for consumers. So there's always trade-offs in everything.
Yeah. That reminds me of an I Love Lucy episode where Lucy and Ethel decide that Lucy's recipe for salad dressing was just so good. And they get their group together and then they go advertise it. And then they start making it at home. And they sell so many of them, right? It was so great that they had so many orders that they couldn't fill it in. And so then they had to say how bad it was so people would stop their orders. But what ended up happening is Ricky came home and he was calculating out the price of the ingredients.
$7.21.
Yeah.
For the groceries.
And $1.20 for the jars.
$1.20 for the jars.
10 cents for the labels.
10 cents for the labels. That's 8.31. And how many jars are you making?
23.
23 jars. And are you selling it for what?
40 cents a quart.
40 cents a quart. 23 jars, 40 cents a quart. Oh, now get this audience out of here, will you?
And found out that they were losing 10 cents a jar for this. So yeah, they were selling lots of product, but they were losing 10 cents a jar.
Now, the thing for you to do is fill these 23 orders and get out of business. That way, I'll only lose $7 or $8.
And I think at the end, they ended up buying store brand and putting their label on it. But yeah, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it really comes down to, if you're trying to sell your position as the right position, there can be some deception in it, but there may not be. So bottom line is, on the one hand, they're not lying as much as we actually think they are. They're not. Yeah, there are definitely politicians who just flat out lie. And you can tell that's probably true. If you get somebody from the other party who says, this particular person you can trust, this particular person you can't trust at all. Okay, they're probably being more objective about the people in the opposition party than the opposition party who says, "Oh, you can trust everybody on our side." That's rarely ever going to be the case with a large group of people.
How do we stop this? I mean, if people, again, majority general look, if they're not really trying to do this to deceive the other person, if they're really doing it because they're coming from a place of, this is what I'm seeing, this is my confirmation bias, so the other side isn't really lying, they're just seeing things differently, and there's a million examples of where they're literally just talking past each other. Your example from Preserving Democracy is a great example of them literally talking past each other. How do we stop it? How do we stop this? You're lying, I'm telling the truth. I'm telling the truth, you're lying, back and forth that we see all the time.
Well, for one is to remember they're politicians, so which means they're ultimately salesmen. They're trying to convince you their side is correct and their side is the best. And I actually take them at the word in that sense, because I do think the vast majority of them, they are trying to convince you that their side is, they're not trying to deceive you, they're trying to convince you of something they actually really believe. They can be dead wrong, but they think that's what it is. I don't look to them, I don't look to a salesman to tell me what's bad about their product. So for example, if I go to buy a car, I don't expect the salesman to come up and tell me all the flaws about the car he's trying to tell me. That's just never going to happen. What I do is I try to cultivate information sources. And one of the really big ways I do that is I watch for the news people, and I watch them very carefully as to, do they report the pros and cons? They may be on the left, they may be on the right, but do they report fairly the pros and cons of their side? Because everything has pros and cons. Everything does, particularly in politics. So there is no, like I said with the economy, what's good for one person is not good for somebody else. Do they change their position to always support? You can see that, when politician A gets in trouble, do they celebrate that? But when politician B in their party gets in the same sort of trouble, they come up with a whole bunch of excuses of why it's not so bad. They'll say, okay, this is the particular policy that they're pushing. Okay, what are the good side? What are the downsides? If they can't tell you both, then they are not being objective. And that's actually a good question for yourself. When you think about, I support a particular policy or a particular politician, can you say, okay, these are the reasons I support them? Can you then also say, these are the 5 things that they trouble me about? I wish they weren't doing that. If you can't say the cons of the things you support, you really are not thinking the whole process through. And you really need to be able to look at both the pros and the cons, evaluate them, and you may end up thinking, okay, this is better, but you need to be able to look at both sides. So to the information sources you look at both sides.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because, when we think about anybody, right? Think about your best friend. Do you really agree 100% with your best friend? You never fight, right? So you've got to be able to see the flaws.
Yeah, well, we don't fight, but we disagree. Yeah. Do you have friends that you disagree with? Do you have people that will keep you in check if you start spinning off into the realm of absurdity?
Well, let us know what you guys think down in the comments. Do you think that our politicians are big liars and you can't ever believe anything they say? Or are they really just people who have a very strong belief and use confirmation bias to present their side of the story? Do you have other ideas for how we can find the truth and stop finger pointing? Let us know down in the comments. We do read your comments and respond to many. And if you made it this far in the video, consider watching one of our other videos and supporting our channel on Patreon. Thanks again for watching Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas.